Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to 21st Century HR Live. I'm your host, Lars Schmidt. And today, I got to be honest, I'm really excited about this episode. You know, when I first started piloting this, I had a chance to actually go through and not figure out my audio. That was a big problem. First started piloting this, I had a chance. Fantastic. Technology is super fun. So basically, when I first had a chance to schedule the episode and my schedule for the month, there's a few people who I really wanted to get on the show. And one of them is today's guest, Ambrosia Vertesi. For those of you that know me, you probably know Ambrosia. She's one of my best friends in the space and outside of it, but also my co-founder and partner in crime for the HR Open Source Initiative. So somebody who, you know, I know very well. We've built, her background has spanned a range of topics, most recently running all of HR for Hootsuite in Vancouver, running all of HR for Duo Security in Ann Arbor. So has 2 unicorns under her belt. And now she's in a new role as an operating partner at Operator Collective. So really excited to bring her on. As a reminder, it's an interactive show. So if you've got questions for us, go ahead and ask them wherever you're streaming this, and we'll do our best to cover them live on air. So with that, let me bring Ambrosia on. Ambrosia.
Hi, how are you?
Good to have you. Of course, like the tech nerd in me, like has an audio hiccup on our episode. That's just fate, I suppose.
I mean, you're still like miles ahead of me in that competency, so it actually made my stress go down a little bit to be like, okay, we're okay.
You know, these things, you just have to roll with them. It's the beauty of streaming technology. So, obviously, I need no introduction. I imagine most viewers probably don't as well. But for those that do, I gave a bit of a rundown on your overall background. I'd love to just have you talk a little bit more specifically, really about your new role at Operator Collective, because it's a fascinating, newly created position. And I think the listeners and me would like to learn a bit more about what you're up to right now.
Yeah. So when Duo was acquired by Cisco, I had just had a baby, went back in and helped with the integration there, and then took some time back. I'm in Vancouver, Canada with my family to really think about what I wanted to do next. The obvious choice, and Lars and I talked about this a lot, was to go and do another, fast growth SaaS tech company and lead the people and operations and kind of kitchen sink functions that I've always been really comfortable in. And as I was taking that time away, I was introduced to someone named Malin Yen, and she was creating Operator Collective. And the idea behind that is it's a VC fund, but it's also comprised differently of bringing about 100 plus operating tech executives, so CTOs, CFOs, heads of sales, whatever it is, together as the LP or investor base, and deploying that community and their learnings. They're in, companies that are scaling really quickly right now. We have Zoom, we have all sorts of different people, pulling those people together and plugging them into the organizations we work with and seeing how we can help differentiate them scaling, building like an enduring and successful organization. So we are a very small team. We are less than a year old. We launched in December. And so I span a ton of different functions, from the talent function, our platform, our internal ops, building and working with our community, and get to work with Malin Yen, who had a huge history with SaaStr and many other successful ventures, and then also Leila Seika, who really built a force at Salesforce and was part of the pay equity movement, and dozens of other people that I get to bring together on a daily basis to see how we can help further organizations we work with. So it's a different hat, but it's kind of the same thing. Like, we're still at day one, starting and scaling. And so I'm just not hiring all the people.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Like, you've obviously, you've done that from the hiring side and the hands-on operator side, 2 times over in big, large scaling, high growth success stories. And now you're in this role that, you're working across a portfolio of 100 operators who are kind of, investing their time and money and capital, obviously, into the companies that you're supporting. You've got a range of portfolio companies as well. And you have a really interesting vantage point, I think, for today's times, right? Where, obviously, we're in this new COVID reality, and it's forced a lot of companies to have to, make adjustments, think through their business model in some cases. Some companies, based on circumstances, are thriving. Some companies are being hammered. So I'm curious to get your perspective, like, as you're looking across, the industry from your unique vantage point, what are you seeing out there? What are some things that kind of stand out to you around these times?
Yeah, there's a few things. We just had, like everybody, we're trying to share and just help and bring voices and learnings to the world right now. And a few days ago, we hosted a virtual session with the CMO at Zoom and CMO at TripActions, and they're having very different realities right now, given their sector and what's going on. And I think that's one of the fundamental grains of truth right now, is just that the baseline's gone. So people are constantly feeling, even if they're being successful, they're feeling like they're going back to redesigning and retooling everything and thinking about how they do everything to make sure that their success continues, and that they, it would be really awful to have to not pay attention and to have a huge situation happen in these times right now, even when you're successful. And then there are people that are constraining and thinking of how they do more with less. And so I think it's really difficult to come up with a common trend. I think one of the things that Operator Collective that we have a unique vantage point into is the fact that out of our 100 operators, we're comprised of 90% female, 40% people of color. And so we're just trying to make sure in all of this, as the focus is on the human element right now, that inclusion and diversity and operationalization of your values, not just reciting your values, ends up being in your plans right now, in your strategic plans, as you're thinking through all of these different areas. So seeing a lot of different experiences, it's hard to say there's just one, but I think
Right.
that's an element. I know on your show a couple times this week, I've been tuning in to try and do my homework. People have said that fundamentally what we're sharing right now is
Yeah, it's interesting too. I think when you talk about values, right? Like, every company has, states they have values, core mission, culture, right? Like all the things that we in HR always talk about. I think scenarios like this really allow your values to come through or not, right? Like, is it a poster on a wall, or is it how you actually operate and behave as an organization? And I think, it's interesting. So we're recording this on Thursday, May 7th. Yesterday, Airbnb had a massive round. I think they let go about a quarter of their employees. And I was just really blown away with the thoughtfulness of their CEO's message and the way that they treated outplacement. And the employees were impacted. I think they had 16 weeks of severance, plus additional weeks for each year served. They had benefits for 1 year. They were able to keep their laptops, and they actually are kind of redeploying their recruiting team, their internal recruiting team, to be an outplacement, resource, essentially, to kind of help these employees land on their feet. And I'm just curious, like, obviously, I'm sure you've read the letter, heard the news. Like, I'd love to get your kind of take. And how did you respond to that when you saw that announcement come out?
Yeah, there's been a few I've been watching, just like everyone else, tuned into how you show up right now is going to be how you're defined. And, really that line between your employer brand and your consumer brand is kind of dissipating. I think that Carta, their CEO, did an excellent letter of what he sent to his employees. HubSpot is helping alumni, which is something we haven't ever really seen before. And I think that they have a track record of setting the pace on things like that. Airbnb. There's a few case studies that I hope were executed. I've been in HR, so I'm always thinking, like, I really hope that was executed as well as it was marketed. And so here's to hoping that it was, for everybody's sake, including the practitioners who are looking to try and push this new practice into place ongoing. So I've seen a lot of practitioners being like, how do we make this the new baseline? Like, how do we push for that? And seeing that a lot, actually, a lot of conversation around how do we do that. Another conversation I'm seeing a lot when these kinds of things happen is everyone's talking about going back and using your values to guide your decision making. I would love to see the communities that are showing exactly how they do that. And it's not just, the 6 executives sitting in a room being like, yes, we are this. So we're doing all these things, and they're not really, connected. They're just communicating it out. And so I'd love to see that sharing of those kinds of resources and practices, and going a little bit deeper on how teams hold themselves accountable to those decisions or make those decisions. And that's my hope. My HR open source hope is always more templates, more sharing.
Let's dig into that. I mean, so again, for those of you that are familiar with either of us, you know that we're the co-founders of HR Open Source. We turned that over to an amazing operating board last year. So both of us have stepped back from any formal role with HROS. But our kind of journey towards HROS really started even before that. When we first met, I was running talent at NPR. You were running people at Hootsuite, and we got introduced by a mutual friend who thought we would nerd out on HR stuff. I think those are her literal words. And she was right. And our very first conversation, we spent 2 hours on the phone together, basically laying everything bare, being like, oh, I'm hitting a wall on this. What have you ever faced this? Like, what do you do to overcome this? And it was I've never had that deep and open and kind of vulnerable first conversation, especially as like, here's all the things I'm not good at. Here's all the things I'm struggling with. And I think it became the basis of our friendship. But I'm curious, like, there's so many things to get into on HROS. What is your take on just as we were getting started, what was your perspective on kind of what you thought and or hoped we would build when we first started putting that together?
Yeah. Well, I think it's really nice when you meet someone at the intersection of vulnerability, right? Like, we were both in this place. Neither of us had 2 hours to spend on the phone, but the investment of that friendship, I think, was really fundamental. And so there's a quote that I like, and I'm not a big quote chaser, but I like it. And it says, "Adversity doesn't build character, it reveals it," by James Allen. And I think that at that point in time, there was a moment at which a lot of our peers were hitting a wall. It was a shared experience of feeling as though the goalposts had changed on what success in their role looked like. Obviously, for me, being at Hootsuite, social HR was a really big component of that, and was something, as we were still growing, was an expectation to make sure that we set the bar for the best practice on that. But by no means was I a marketer or a social media person. But that, I think that feeling is what people are feeling right now. But back then, I don't know if people were as empowered to be as open with their practices as they are now. But I don't think the reaction of people who want to share always want to share, and people who don't. And I think that vein is still there. I think back then when we started HR Open Source, it was people didn't feel that they could. And so I hope that community is feeling the success, because they're the ones who did it.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting to see how this whole situation has really kind of been an accelerant on, and whether you call it open source, whether you call it, working out loud, collaboration, it really doesn't matter. The idea that HR leaders are much more willing to open up their practices and their approaches and their templates. And, we've seen that with the coronavirus HR business comms doc that I threw together. I've seen that in so many places. And I'm curious, like, how do you see these circumstances impacting kind of practitioner views in the field towards, getting out of silos and kind of opening up their practices?
Yeah, I think one of the areas that I mean, there are so many communities we share, but HR Open Source is definitely one of many. And I think that the whole movement all at the same time. But one of the things that I think was differentiating was our expectation for people to share what didn't work. And it's a lot easier to package something that worked and market it and come out looking like a top employer. It's a lot harder to share when something failed, or when you made a mistake, or what the learnings were. And so I think that's a thing that I think will only happen when practitioners stop just looking vertically down and putting all that pressure on themselves, and start looking horizontally across the organization and going, what is sales doing? How are they making sales? Are our employees going to be on the road making sales anymore? Are conferences going to be there? Obviously not. But taking a look at the behaviors of the other peers around them, what's going on in marketing, what's going on in engineering, and taking all of that back and seeing themselves as a person who brings all of those things together and then functionally operationalizes them. I think when people are stressed out or when there's moments where the pressure's high, they don't share the mistakes. They just look vertically down and they say, well, all my peers are doing this, so this is what I'm going to do. But I would hope and encourage them to look at what their business is doing and what their peers are doing and tune into cross-functional webinars and sessions as well. I go to lots of marketing sessions. I go to CFO sessions. And I think that that enables me to better support the organizations I work with. But also, if I was the head of people right now, I think it would enable me to have a better conversation about what I want in the strategic planning conversations or budget conversations.
Yeah, and I'm curious, like, do you miss that at all? And I don't mean like.
Whoa, way to put me on the spot.
No, yeah, but I mean, it's funny. Like, and I'll share my perspective on this too. It's like this is such a once in a generation, experience that we're all going through, and businesses are going through, and teams are going through, and obviously, I've been outside of being a practitioner. I've been a consultant, an advisor, and a search partner, and all those things for the last 6.5 years. So I haven't been, in the trenches in this situation. And we're both plugged into a lot of similar communities and networking groups. And so we see the conversations that are happening. We see the collaboration, and there's it's weird. Like for me, at least, and I'll give my own take first. In the last few years, like there's an element where I kind of, regret's not the right word, but like I kind of wish that I was in that seat and in a position to be able to be guiding a team through this from the inside, right? Like I'm trying to do a lot of things to help support the people who are doing that externally and kind of tapping into my network and tapping into open source collaboration and boosting, resources and tools and frameworks. Obviously, but it's not the same as somebody who's in that seat making those decisions. And so, okay, that's where I'm coming from. But like, what's your perspective? Do you have moments where you're kind of like, wow, it would be nice to be there, or is it more like, thank God I'm not?
I think that you gave me a grace period, so thanks for answering. I was like, oh man. I think, there's always an element of wanting, I like having a team. I like having, focus and feeling like I can add value to something. And right now, I feel as though, we have a lot of portfolio companies who don't even have a people leader. They're early. So they're trying to navigate those things. So I do feel connected to making an impact. And I think that's what's important. I don't feel like thank God I'm not in the people position right now. But I do think that it's a difficult one. So my empathy is super high. I look at people like yourself who like pulls together every resource on the planet to help the community. And I wouldn't put myself in that category of assistance, but I do try to see where I can connect maybe a little bit more deeply, maybe have an actual conversation with somebody or do some more one-on-one direct guidance than maybe I would normally. So right now, I don't miss being in the people seat because I am really loving my team and this opportunity and learning all about that. But I do want to be effective and helpful because I do think that there are some landmines that, especially if you're in that seat for the first time, you just won't know until you hit it. And I think one of those, you and I were talking about this before, how do you take a moment like this where if you're in an organization, everything is melting and budgets are going away left, right, and center, how do you still advocate for yours? And I would hate to see us get out of this, really tectonic shift situation and have HR just have more expectations with the same budget they've always had and the same percentage of revenue and just have not taken that opportunity to be able to successfully navigate more. And not more at the expense of others, but just more because it's changed. People are going to expect more from their employer. And, I've constantly seen that bar raise, more employer branding, more diversity, more learning, no more money,
Yeah.
So that's where I feel perhaps like I could fill that gap of not being in that seat is like, I'd like to contribute more to that conversation about like, okay, programmatically, I think there's a really important dialogue happening about like, what are the new table stakes benefits and everything. What I'd like to see more, not that I'm a comp and ben person, you should totally have a comp and ben person on here, but how do we take this opportunity and not take advantage of it, but how do we reshape the people programs, but also the people spend?
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. I think when you look at, as we're kind of in this position now, and as we work towards wherever it is we're going, right? Like we don't know kind of how long the tail of this is going to be and what things are going to look like, but we know things will be different, right? We know that not as many people are going to be going back into an office. We know we're going to have a higher percentage of our population being remote. We know that we're going to have some colleagues and teammates with some, real mental health struggles as a result of this, and they're going to need support. We're going to need, childcare is kind of a question mark right now in terms of schools reopening. Is it safe? Are they going to be? What's the situation going to be there? There's so many things that are as of now still kind of unknowable in terms of the net result. But what we do know is that it's going to put more pressure on the people function because we're going to be asked to do the same, if not more, in a vastly different landscape than we did just 3 months ago. And I'm curious, as you look at companies that maybe, their T&E budgets are, for a lot of companies, are pretty substantial. People aren't getting on airplanes right now. Their commercial real estate budgets are pretty substantial, but, some might be rethinking when their leases is up if they really need that space. Like how do you have any advice for HR leaders that are viewing this as to how they can kind of, for lack of a better word, assert themselves in that conversation around the potential reallocation of some of those dollars towards people programs? How can they fight for that budgetary and financial support that's going to be necessary for them to be able to kind of meet these elevated expectations?
Yeah. I think those are all big new topics that are going to have, the mental health, financial wellness is going to be huge. I think people are going to have an expectation that like they've never had before on helping people out. And how do you translate those expectations into strategies, then into resources, and then execute against them like that? Because that's going to be the expectation. The expectation is this is what happened in 2020. What do we get to do in 2021? Which is very hard to turn it around that quickly. The majority of CFOs and COOs and executive teams that I've been connecting with or listening to have been saying that the budget, even if they're public or private, the budget is now a constant conversation about trade-offs and about strategies and what's moving the needle and where things can be reallocated. So I think there's a dialogue there that's going to be ongoing, whether or not you're in growth in your organization right now, because there are lots of those, or if you're constrained, you're still managing the fact that you have to attract and retain employees at some point. And so if there's an opportunity to sit at that table and say, maybe create some space to be like, I don't just want to talk every week about how we're reacting to COVID. Like, I don't want that to be my dialogue. I'd like to have a conversation about what I'm hearing are going to be talent strategies for us on the other side of this, and start having that conversation early and often. And I think that mentally, some people practitioners, and I've definitely done this too, I'm not perfect in that regard, but they have a tendency to react to the fact that it's hard to hire talent, to react to the fact that something's going on. And if within your team, whatever the structure is, you can work with your CEO, your COO, your CFO to, even if it's just one session, to talk about not just how you're reacting to COVID, but what is it going to look like after this? What are some of the things that the business needs to consider from an attraction and retention standpoint? And then what are the implications to the business for doing it or not doing it? And then what are the costs? And then having a conversation of, I understand that typically, the people or the budget for this is X. And at least for the next little bit, is there an opportunity to move the needle? And just keep having that conversation. I've been in organizations before where they didn't want, a performance management strategy, or we didn't have enough money to invest in leadership and development. And I would have presented, I just talk about it until they make fun of me. I would talk about it 30 times, 40 times over the course of a few years, and just not be willing to say, we don't have the money, we don't have the budget, this, and I'll just talk about that later and choose my battles. I think your job as an advocate to try and bring a strategic conversation and advocate every time you have the mic.
Yeah, I mean, I think that persistence and advocacy are really important lessons and reminders for people leaders that are watching, that are out there, because you can't stop with no, right? And the reality is like you don't know where that no is coming from. Like the CEOs, CFOs, they're stressed by these circumstances. There's a lot of unknown, and so you have to kind of safeguard funds and capital. They're trying to do that as best they can. But don't present a case, and then if you get told no, just stop there. Like you've got to be persistent, make an intelligent case, have a chance to pull some data, best practices of other examples of what companies are doing, whatever it might be to help you be more influential in your conversation. But that's not a one-time conversation, so that's a great reminder.
Yeah. Also, it's not a meet them where they are. Like if you're talking to the CFO and all they're hearing you say is, I need money.
Right.
That's not helpful when they're like, don't you understand what's going on in the context of this?
Right.
Right. And so I think I go back to my point of being like, understand what all your peers are going through, understand their businesses, understand what they need. Ask them, behind the scenes, what do you think it's going to take after this to retain your team? What do you think it's going to take to get the best out of them? How do we differentiate ourselves? And then bring that back. And so there's a couple different prongs, I think, of like going to your peers and kind of building that buy-in on a way that isn't like, weird and underhanded, like I'm going to make a coup for all the money that's on. No, but but how do you bring together what the business needs with where you think it should invest instead of being mindful of not, HR sees itself as a cost center a lot of the time, but there has never been a better time to reposition yourself as a value driver. Yeah,
that's a great point. And I want to actually, I know we're almost up on time. I want to jump on the Wayback Machine for a minute with you. We shared a lot of experiences, a lot of memories, scaling HR open source. As we were building that up. When you look back, what was your favorite memory? What's an event, an activity, something that kind of stands out to you the most?
Yeah. There's so many. I mean, I'm going to cheat a little and rattle off a couple because I'm not a big favorites. I never have one person. Anytime we were working on a case study that someone submitted to us and we got to just sit on Zoom and spend hours copywriting, mostly you writing, copywriting and putting it together, especially in the beginning days was my favorite time to feel like we were getting a ton of energy. And then I think going really in the Wayback Machine in 2015, when we were able to go on stage and present this idea to our peers, it became real. It wasn't something that you and I were just like, cool, I wonder if anyone will really care about this thing we're doing. And now it's, nearing a 10,000 person global community that's run by an amazing operating board and a whole bunch of people. So I think those are the two, the tiny private moments and then the big ones. How about you?
Yeah, there's a lot to choose from. I think for the thing that stands out to me is the night before our keynote at Talent Connect, and we were in my room trying to go through rehearsals, and I had horrendous bronchitis. I was pumped up on steroids for probably 10 days going into that. Because I remember that event, I was also emceeing the live stream. So there was, I couldn't have bronchitis.
In super rough shape.
Yeah, it was. I just remember I was pounding tea, I was pounding honey, whatever it could be, and we're trying to rehearse, and I couldn't even get through it. And I remember just at one point, I'm trying not to freak out. I'm trying not to freak out in front of you because I'm just this is going to be a disaster. And you just gave me this look, and you're just it's all gonna be fine. It'll all be cool. And for some reason, instantly, just hearing that and just seeing your face when you said that, it took all the anxiety out of me. And I was like, you know what? It will be. One way or another, it will be. And it was. But it was so funny. Vividly, I just remember we've had so many conversations. That one moment in that one conversation, I can still picture your face. It was just, it was what I needed at the time, and definitely something that I haven't forgot.
Oh, that's the first time you told me that. That's really nice. I definitely was having a panic attack inside, but I think that's the goal of HR, duck on water, right? Is to be in that moment, to put aside, anything else than just be empathetic. And you definitely still perform. So thank you for that.
Well, Ambrosia, it's been awesome having you on. I want to close with, the bit we always close the show with is one good thing. So I'm going to turn it over to you to share any one good thing from your past week.
We just announced, I'm in British Columbia, Canada. We just announced that we will be starting phase 1 of our reentry into society. So we're very lucky that everyone's been, complying. So looks like we're getting the world back at parks and a few other things. And with a 2-year-old, that brings me so much joy.
I can imagine. Well, I'm stoked to hear that. I'll share our story of where we are. I mean, I don't know. Hopefully we'll be celebrating a win like that in the near future. But we'll just have to see. So Ambrosia, it was awesome catching up.
Sorry, Mike.
Thanks for indulging me on memory lane. Thanks for helping us get a better feel for Operator Collective. And we will be back same time, noon Eastern tomorrow for office hours with Craig Fisher. So in the meantime, everybody, take care out there, take care of each other, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.